I have spent decades farming professionally. I have prepared soil and always advised other growers and taught workshops on how to get a productive garden bed ready for spring. And last spring, I wheeled my rototiller to the end of the driveway, put a free sign on it, and never touched it again. Within one single growing season, 8 months, the soil in my backyard went from hard, cracked, lifeless gray clay to something so dark, so deep, so alive with earthworms that my neighbor stopped me at the fence and asked what nursery I'd ordered topsoil from. I hadn't spent a single dollar on soil. Now I know you've been doing this too. Every spring, you fire up that tiller, you break up those rows, you smell that fresh turned earth, and you feel like you've done something right. Your daddy did it, your granddaddy did it, and if your tomatoes struggled, you probably just hadn't gone deep enough. I know that feeling because for 30 years, I was the one telling people that. Here is the hardest thing I have ever had to say as a professional farmer. Every single pass of that tiller, through your soil mine, yours, all of it was destroying the one living system that was doing the real work for free, right underneath our boots. Not a machine, not a fertilizer bag, something alive. University soil scientists at Purdue, Cornell, and Oregon State have been documenting this quietly for over 40 years. The research was there. I just kept tilling anyway, because that's what professionals did. The moment I stopped, my soil became unrecognizable. Today, I'm walking you through 10 discoveries that permanently change how I farm and will change how you see your backyard garden forever. Number 4, what your tiller destroys every single spring is something I wish I had known 3 decades ago. Number 7 is the underground engineer already working in your soil that outperforms any machine I have ever operated. And number 10, stay all the way to the end, is what a woman named Ruth Stout figured out 70 years ago that modern peer-reviewed science has now confirmed. But first, drop a comment right now. How many years have you been tilling? I want to see that number. Let's get into it. Let me show you exactly what I mean. You know that feeling early spring morning, you fire up the tiller, you make those first passes and the soil flips up dark and clean and perfect, rows of soft black earth as far as you can see, and you stand back and you think, that is a healthy garden. I thought that for 30 years. Here is what was actually happening. Every single pass of that tiller was shattering what soil scientists call soil aggregates, the tiny living clumps of mineral particles, root fragments, and microbial glue that hold your soil structure together. Those aggregates create the natural air pockets and water channels that your plant roots travel through. When the tiller spins through at high RPM, it doesn't loosen your soil. It pulverizes it. And underneath the fluffy top layer, it was packing down harder every year. Researchers describe it as a tillage pan, a dense, compacted layer just below tilling depth that roots can't penetrate and water can't drain through. The longer you tilled, the worse it got. Then there's this. Every time you turned that soil over, you were pulling thousands of dormant weed seeds up from the depths, seeds that had been safely buried and inactive, and delivering them straight to the surface where light and warmth would wake them right up. More tilling, more weeds every single time. And the earthworms, the ones doing the real biological work underground? Cornell University soil research is direct about this. Mechanical tillage kills them either directly from the blades or by destroying their burrows and exposing them to heat and drying air. That beautiful dark turned soil wasn't a sign of a healthy garden. It was the look of an ecosystem that had just been torn apart. Let's talk about who profits from you never knowing that. Now, I want to be fair here. I'm not saying anyone sat in a boardroom and made a plan to keep you tilling. I'm saying something simpler and honestly more uncomfortable than that. The global lawn and garden equipment industry is worth over $40 billion a year. The tiller market alone, just tillers, is a $2.5 billion industry, and it is growing. Every spring, millions of American gardeners, most of them over 50, most of them with decades of gardening behind them, pull that machine out of the garage, fill it with gas, and go to work. And nobody in a $2.5 billion industry has a financial reason to walk up to you and say, you don't need this. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how money works. Here's what makes it sting a little more. A man named Edward Faulkner wrote a book back in 1943, over 80 years ago, called Plowman's Folly. His entire argument was that mechanical soil inversion was unnecessary and destructive. He had science. He had the evidence. The agricultural establishment largely ignored him. Meanwhile, the culture of tilling, the idea that clean-turned soil equals a serious, hard-working gardener, became so deeply embedded in American backyard culture that it was passed down like a family tradition. Your parents tilled, their parents tilled, and every garden center, every equipment catalog, every spring advertisement reinforced the same picture: fluffy black rows and a gleaming machine. The University of Saskatchewan, the University of Minnesota Extension, Cornell University, they've all published research pointing in the same direction for decades. The information was never hidden. It just wasn't in any commercial interest to make sure you heard it. Now you're hearing it. Now, before I walk you through everything I discovered, I want you to know this isn't something I made up, and it isn't new. Long before the first gas-powered tiller was ever built, Native American communities across this continent were farming without turning a single shovelful of soil. For thousands of years, they used what we now call the Three Sisters system: corn, beans, and squash, planted together in undisturbed ground. No plows, no mechanical inversion. They layered compost, they left the soil alone, and they fed entire civilizations doing it. They understood something it took us centuries to rediscover. Fast forward to modern soil science. Researchers at Purdue University, one of the most respected agricultural universities in the country, published findings that are worth reading twice. Their long-term field studies found that earthworm populations in no-till fields are typically at least double those found in conventionally tilled fields. Double. And it matters what those earthworms are doing down there. A peer-reviewed study published in the National Institutes of Health's scientific database, looking specifically at no-till farming systems, found that earthworms redistribute organic material to lower soil horizons, create macropores that plant roots follow directly, dramatically increase water infiltration, and actively stimulate nitrogen cycling. All of that, underground, without a machine, without fuel, without you lifting a finger. Penn State Extension confirms what your soil is sitting on. Earthworm casts the material worms deposit as they move through the soil, containing measurably higher concentrations of available nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and calcium than the surrounding bulk soil. That's your fertilizer, built on site, for free. These aren't bloggers or backyard hobbyists. This is Purdue, Penn State, the National Institutes of Health, thousands of years of indigenous land knowledge, all pointing in the same direction. What lives in your soil is more powerful than anything you can buy. All right, let's get into what I actually found. Discovery number one: your soil has an architecture and you've been demolishing it. Inside healthy garden soil, there are microscopic structures called soil aggregates, tiny clumps made of mineral particles, plant root fragments, and biological glue produced by soil organisms. Think of them like the load-bearing walls of a building. They create the natural air pockets and water channels that roots travel through and that rain soaks into. When a rotary tiller spins through at high RPM, it doesn't loosen this structure. It shatters it completely. Every pass. The University of Minnesota Extension describes exactly what happens next. With those channels destroyed, the soil compacts from the top down, water can no longer drain properly, and roots hit resistance instead of open pathways. The practical fix? Stop the machine. The aggregates begin rebuilding the moment you leave the soil alone. It takes time, but it costs nothing. Discovery number two: there is a living glue inside your soil, and it's worth protecting. The reason healthy no-till soil holds together the way it does comes down to a protein called glomalin, produced by a group of fungi called arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that live in undisturbed soil and form partnerships with your plant roots. A peer-reviewed study published in the journal Soil Systems found that soils under zero tillage had significantly greater glomalin levels and water-stable aggregates than conventionally tilled soils measured consistently over a full 12 months. That biological cement is what gives healthy garden soil its rich, crumbly structure. One tilling pass shreds the fungal network that produces it, and those networks can take years to fully recover. The practical fix? Protect what's already there. Feed the surface with compost and mulch. Let the fungi do the binding work underground. And once those aggregates are stable and that fungal network is intact, the next thing that moves in will surprise you completely. Discovery number 3. Every time you tilled, you planted your weeds for next year. This one took me a long time to accept because it feels backward. Every cubic foot of backyard soil contains thousands of dormant weed seeds sitting quietly at depth, waiting. They can stay viable down there for years, some for decades. As long as they stay buried, in the dark, they don't germinate. Then you run your tiller through. According to the University of New Hampshire Extension, and confirmed by weed science research at Washington State University, tillage is the primary driver of vertical weed seed movement in garden soil. Every pass of your tiller lifts those dormant seeds from safe depth and delivers them straight to the germination zone warm, lit, watered, and ready to sprout. You thought you were preparing a clean seedbed. You were planting next season's weeds. Gardeners who switch to no-till consistently report dramatic reductions in weed pressure within 1 to 2 growing seasons, not because the seeds disappear, but because they stay buried where they belong. The practical fix: a thick layer of mulch or compost on top keeps the light out and the dormant seed bank locked in the dark. No tilling, no weed explosion. Discovery number 4. There is a hidden wall under your garden, and you built it. Here is the one that genuinely shocked me most. Dig past your normal tilling depth in any long-tilled garden, and you'll find it. A dense, compacted layer called the tillage pan built up over years of the tiller working at the exact same depth over and over. Mississippi State University Extension describes it clearly. When this layer forms, roots cannot penetrate it. They grow horizontally along its surface instead of downward. Water cannot drain through it either, pooling above it after rain. Your garden wasn't failing because of bad soil. It was hitting a wall. The practical fix: deep-rooted cover crops like tillage radishes will biologically drill through that layer over a single season with no machinery required. Now that you know what's underground, it's time to meet what's supposed to be down there. Now we get to the part that made me genuinely stop and stare at the ground differently. Discovery number 5. There is an engineer living under your garden right now. Meet Lumbricus terrestris, the common nightcrawler. Purdue University's Extension Service, one of the most authoritative sources on soil biology in the country, describes this creature as a deep burrower that constructs large, permanent vertical channels reaching 5 to 6 feet into the subsoil. Not temporary tunnels, permanent infrastructure, built and maintained by a worm. Those channels do 3 things no tiller can replicate. They allow heavy rainfall to drain straight down instead of pooling or running off. They deliver oxygen deep into the soil profile. And according to a peer-reviewed study published in the NIH scientific database, they create preferential pathways that plant roots follow directly preformed, nutrient-lined highways heading straight to where the water is stored. A published Purdue study found that long-term no-till fields consistently support at least double the earthworm populations of conventionally tilled fields. Double. Because tilling destroys their burrows, exposes them to heat and predators, and collapses everything they built. The practical fix: stop tilling. Give them undisturbed ground, surface organic matter to feed on, and they rebuild their network on their own schedule, at no cost to you. Discovery number 6. Your earthworms are running a fertilizer factory underground for free. Here is what those earthworms leave behind. As a nightcrawler moves through the soil, it ingests organic matter and mineral particles, processes them through a specialized digestive system, and deposits what scientists call casts. Penn State Extension, citing Purdue research, confirms directly earthworm casts contain measurably higher concentrations of available nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and calcium than the surrounding bulk soil. Peer-reviewed research puts that enrichment at between 1.6 and 4.3 times greater than untouched soil That is biological fertilizer, produced continuously underground. No bag, no cost, no application. The more undisturbed your soil, the more of it you have. Discovery number 7. You can build a no-till garden bed on top of your lawn this weekend. You don't need to rip anything out. You don't need to dig. You don't need a single piece of equipment. This method is called sheet mulching, sometimes called lasagna gardening, and Oregon State University Extension calls it one of the most effective ways to establish a new garden bed without disturbing the soil beneath. Here is how it works. Mow the area as low as possible. Lay down a thick, overlapping barrier of plain cardboard with no glossy printing, edges overlapping by at least 6 inches so nothing sneaks through the gaps. Saturate it completely with water. That cardboard blocks all light to everything beneath it, smothers existing grass and dormant weed seeds, and begins decomposing, and as it does, it draws earthworms to the surface from below. On top of that barrier, build your layers, a couple inches of nitrogen-rich green material, like grass clippings or manure, then a deeper layer of carbon-rich browns like straw or wood chips, then finish with 2 to 3 inches of finished compost on top to plant into. University of Florida's IFAS extension confirms, as long as you don't disturb the surface after building it, dormant weed seeds beneath the cardboard stay too deep to germinate. The whole system can be built in an afternoon. Discovery number 8, 3 things that quietly destroy no-till gardens before they start. First, perennial weeds. Thistles, bindweed, and quackgrass will push right through standard mulch layers. The fix, smother problem areas with 12 full inches of mulch, or cover with a black tarp for a full season to exhaust their root reserves before you build. Second, cold spring soil. Thick mulch insulates. Rake it back at least 1 to 2 weeks before planting to let the soil warm. Simple, but easy to overlook. Third, contaminated inputs. Test any imported hay or horse manure for herbicide residue before it touches your bed. Certain persistent herbicides can linger in straw and silently wreck an entire growing season. Know these 3, and your transition starts clean. I told you at the very beginning to stay until the end. Here is why. Discovery number 10. A woman named Ruth Stout figured all of this out over 100 years ago. Ruth Stout was born in 1884 in Kansas. She didn't start gardening until her 40s. She used conventional methods for 12 years, digging, tilling, weeding, the whole routine until one spring, the man who usually plowed her garden didn't show up. Rather than wait, she grabbed some rotting hay she had on hand and spread it across the unplowed ground. And her garden grew better. She spent the next several decades refining what she discovered that afternoon. A permanent year-round blanket of hay or straw, 6 to 8 inches deep, laid directly on the soil and never removed, just continuously added to. No plowing, no digging, no weeding, no chemical fertilizers. She called it the no-work garden method, wrote about it in Organic Gardening magazine from 1953 to 1971, and published multiple books. Thousands of university scientists and horticulture experts visited her garden in Redding, Connecticut. Many were skeptical. Most left converted. Ruth Stout gardened this way well into her 90s. Now here is what makes this extraordinary. A peer-reviewed study published in Springer Nature's Urban Ecosystems Journal found that permanent organic mulch improves soil moisture retention by 75 to 94% compared to bare soil. Research published in NPJ Climate and Atmospheric Science confirms that permanent mulch actively promotes decomposition of organic matter, reduces erosion, and builds long-term soil carbon, which is exactly what feeds the earthworm populations, preserves the mycorrhizal networks, and keeps the dormant weed seeds buried. Everything Ruth Stout observed by hand in a Connecticut garden, modern soil science has now confirmed in peer-reviewed literature. She didn't have a laboratory, she had a hay bale and 40 years of patience, and she never once needed a tiller. If this section changed how you see your garden, Share this video with one gardener you know who is still tilling. They need to see this. Here is what I want you to take away from everything we covered today. You do not need a tiller. You never did. Beneath your feet right now, whether you've been gardening for 2 years or 50, there is a biological system that has been trying to do this work for you. Earthworms build drainage channels 5 feet deep. Fungal networks produce the glue that holds your soil together. A dormant weed seed bank that asks only one thing: to be left alone. Every time you tilled, you interrupted it. And every season you stay out of the ground with a machine, it comes back a little stronger. Oregon State University's Extension Horticulture team puts it plainly: tilling destroys the air and water pores, disrupts the microorganisms clustered around roots, and breaks down the very aggregates that keep soil healthy. The moment you stop, the rebuilding begins. It won't happen overnight. Be patient with your soil the way your soil has been patient with you. In the first season, you'll notice fewer weeds. The second season, the ground will feel different under your hands, darker, looser, alive in a way that's hard to describe until you've felt it. Ruth Stout felt it in her 40s. She proved it through her 90s. You don't need a bag of fertilizer. Your earthworms are already manufacturing nutrients below the surface. You don't need a tiller. Your night crawlers are already drilling drainage channels no machine can replicate. You don't need to buy anything. You just need to stop. Now, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me, are you still tilling, or have you already made the switch? If you've gone no-till, how long has it been? I read every single one. If this video gave you something worth keeping, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you know a gardener who is still out there every spring behind a rototiller, send this to them today. They've worked hard enough. See you in the next one.